Moses and the Exodus. The Bible says the Hebrews migrated to Egypt because of drought and threat of famine. Now at first, the Hebrews were given places of honor in the Egyptian kingdom. However, later they were forced into slavery. Let my people go. The Hebrews fled Egypt, perhaps between 1300 and 1200 BC. Jews called this event the Exodus, and they remember it every year during Passover. The Torah says that the man who led the Hebrews out of slavery was named Moses. It was told that at the time of Moses' birth, the Egyptian Pharaoh felt threatened by the number of Hebrews in Egypt, and thus ordered all Hebrew male babies to be killed. Moses' mother hid her baby in the reeds along the banks of the Nile. There, an Egyptian princess found and adopted him. And though raised in luxury, he supposedly did not forget his Hebrew birth. When God commanded him to lead the Jews out of Egypt, he obeyed. A new covenant. While the Hebrews were traveling across the Sinai Peninsula, Moses supposedly climbed to the top of Mount Sinai to pray. The Bible says he spoke with God. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he brought down 2 stone tablets on which Yahweh had written the 10 Commandments. These 10 Commandments would become the basis of religious law for Judaism. The Hebrews believed that these laws formed a new covenant between God and the Hebrew people. God promised to protect the Hebrews, and they promised to keep God's commandments. The Torah reports that Hebrews wandered for 40 years in the Sinai desert. Later books of the Bible tell about the history of the Hebrews after their wanderings. After the death of Moses, they returned to Canaan, where Abraham had lived. The Hebrews made a change from a nomadic tribal society to settled herders, farmers, and city dwellers. They learned new technology from neighboring peoples of Canaan. When the Hebrews arrived in Canaan, they were loosely organized into 12 tribes. These tribes lived in separate territories and were self-governing. In times of emergency, the Bible reports that God would raise up judges. They would unite the tribes and provide judicial and military leadership during crises. In the course of time, God chose a series of judges, one of the most prominent of whom was a woman named Deborah. Hebrew law. Deborah's leadership was unusual for a Hebrew woman. The roles of men and women were quite separate in Hebrew society. Women could not officiate at religious ceremonies, and in general, a Hebrew woman's most important duty was to raise her children and provide moral leadership for the community and for her family. The 10 Commandments were part of a code of laws delivered to Moses. The code included other rules regulating social and religious behavior. In some ways, this code resembled Hammurabi's code with the attitude of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. However, its strict justice was softened by expressions of God's mercy. The code was later interpreted by religious teachers called prophets. These interpretations tended to emphasize greater equality before the law than did other codes of the time. The prophets constantly urged the Hebrews to stay true to their covenant with God. The prophets taught that the Hebrews had a duty to worship God and live justly with one another. The goal was a moral life lived in accordance with God's laws. In the words of the prophet Micah, "He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." This emphasis on right conduct in the worship of one God is called ethical monotheism, a Hebrew idea that has influenced human behavior for thousands of years through 3 religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Torah, the sacred text of the Hebrew people, is usually kept in a container, I guess I would call it, like the one that you see before you. The Torah case is usually called an ark. And the sacred text is kept upon a scroll, not in a book, the way that you might find the Bible. So this is on a scroll. Because there's a really particular way of housing the Torah and other Judaic texts, and because there's a special container for it, it means that not everybody has a copy typically, and that these are particularly important. So later on, when we read some historical documents in history where synagogues, which is the Jewish house of worship, are being destroyed, for example, in World War II, one of the things that will be especially devastating to the people, to the community, will be the discard and the destruction of things like this, the Torah case, the ark, and the scrolls inside. Typically, it's handwritten as well. The Kingdom of Israel. So Canaan, the land that the Hebrews believed had been promised to them by God, combined largely harsh features such as an arid desert, rocky wilderness, grassy hills, and a really dry, hot valley of the Jordan River. Water was never plentiful, and even the numerous limestone formations soaked up any excess rainfall. After first settling in the south-central area of ancient Palestine, the Hebrews expanded both south and north. When they do that, they run across peoples that are already settled in that particular area. And if you remember the original map, they're going to run up against the Philistines, which you might remember from 2 days ago. They're also going to run it up against the Canaanites. Saul and David establish a kingdom. The judges occasionally pulled together the widely scattered tribes for a united military effort. Nonetheless, the Philistines and other people in the area threatened the Hebrews' position in ancient Palestine. The Hebrews got along somewhat better with their Canaanite neighbors. Eventually, the only large tribe of the original 12 tribes was the tribe of Judah. As a result, the Hebrews came to be called Jews, and their religion, Judaism. From about 1020 to 922 BC, the Hebrews united under 3 able kings. The kings' names were Saul, David, and Solomon. The new kingdom was called Israel. For 100 years, Israel enjoyed its greatest period of power and of independence. Saul, the first of the 3 kings, was chosen largely because of his success in driving out the Philistines from the central hills of ancient Palestine. Saul is portrayed in the Bible as a tragic man who was given to bouts of jealousy. After his death, he was succeeded by his son-in-law, David. King David was an extremely popular leader. He united the tribes, he established Jerusalem as the capital, and founded a dynasty. So you can see Saul's kingdom was relatively small. David's kingdom grew substantially, and that's when Jerusalem became the center of the Israeli kingdom. The last king that we're going to talk about is Solomon, and he was considered especially wise. And here are some of the stories about Solomon. I think I have Solomon. Yeah. Solomon builds a kingdom. Last piece for today. About the year 962 BC, David was succeeded by his son Solomon, whose mother was Bathsheba. Solomon was the most powerful of the Hebrew kings. He built a trading empire with the help of his friend Hiram, the king of the Phoenician city of Tyre. You guys should remember the Phoenician city of Tyre because that's where the red purple dye from the snails is coming from. And they are quite wealthy, and it's to the north of this particular spot that we're in. Solomon also beautified the capital city of Jerusalem. The crowning achievement of his extensive building program in Jerusalem was this beautiful temple which he built to glorify God. The temple was to become the home, the permanent home, for the Ark of the Covenant. Well, the Ark of the Covenant, loosely according to clip art, is down to the bottom right of the screen right now. But the Ark of the Covenant, of course, contained the tablets of Moses' laws. So the Ten Commandments are held in the Ark of the Covenant. So the temple that Solomon built was not large, but it gleamed like a precious gem. It had bronze pillars that stood at the temple's entrance. The temple was stone on the outside, while its inner walls were made of cedar, which were covered in gold. The main hall was richly decorated with brass and gold. The main hall was richly decorated, and Solomon also built a royal palace that was almost more costly and more magnificent than the temple itself. Almost done. The kingdom divides. Solomon's projects required really high taxes and badly strained the kingdom's finances. In addition, men were forced to spend 1 month out of every 3 working on the temple. So think about that, a third of their year, 4 months out of the year, would be spent building on this temple. People are going to resent that after a while. So men were forced to spend 1 month out of every 3 working on the temple, and the expense and the forced labor caused a lot of resentment and discontent. As a result, after Solomon's death, the Jews in the northern part of the kingdom, which was located far from the south, revolted. And by 922, the kingdom divided into 2. Israel was in the north, and Judah was in the south. Now, one quick story about Saul. So King Solomon, not King Saul. Hang on just a second, I want to show you a picture. So first of all, you're looking at the Temple of Solomon here. And remember what I said about the gold over top of this beautiful wood and people spending a lot of time constructing this Temple of Solomon that housed the Ark of the Covenant. But now the story about King Solomon. So in the Bible, Solomon prays to God for an understanding mind, which God grants him. Soon after, as the story goes, 2 women with a baby boy were brought before him, and each woman claimed that the baby was hers. After hearing the testimony, Solomon declared, "Divide the living boy in 2 and give them half to one and half to the other." One said, "Please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him." However, the other woman accepted. "It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it." Solomon knew that the woman who would give up her child to save him was the real mother, and made the decision to grant the baby to her. All right, guys, thank you very much for your cooperation. You're going to now move to the matching activity and to the crossword puzzle to begin the review process for the chapter test. Okay, tomorrow we will finish. There's just a tiny bit left in the chapter, and we're going to talk Babylonian captivity tomorrow, and so be prepared for that. Okay. Some things we haven't mentioned yet are a yarmulke, the skull cap. You guys probably recognize that. Men in the Judaic faith wear that out of respect for God. And there's a bar mitzvah. When a Jewish boy turns 13 years old, he becomes a religious adult, and they hold a bar mitzvah, and the girls have a bat mitzvah.